So it's 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon, and about an hour into my first morning, the power cut out in the entire, not just the building, the entire neighborhood. Apparently, the air conditioning goes out, the lights go out, everything stops.
Hello and welcome to One-Off Travel Stories. I'm your host, Andrew Tawasterna. Each week I will chat with someone about one of their favorite travel stories. That one story that they've told countless times to friends and family around the dinner table. We'll hear captivating and sometimes unbelievable travel tales and learn about the locations where they happened. Today we'll be joined by an old friend of mine, Marc Gervers. Marc currently lives in Budapest, Hungary, where he is a lawyer in international arbitration at the European headquarters of a law firm. Marc was born and raised in Toronto, Canada. Although at a pretty young age, his family moved to Europe, where he spent a number of years in Rome and in Paris. His mother was also Hungarian, so putting that all together, he now speaks 5 languages and has moved cities and countries many times over the years. Consequently, he has a repertoire of great travel stories. He's going to tell us a little bit about a recent story, actually, an impromptu trip to Cairo, Egypt. I say impromptu. He'll explain more in his story about how he, had long dreamed of going to Egypt, but not exactly under these circumstances. So I hope you enjoy. Hey, Marc, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Andrew. What an introduction. Thank you for that.
Of course. Really excited to have you here today.
Thanks, buddy. I'm looking forward to it.
I always love chatting with you and commiserating about the stories and what you're experiencing. For you, home is often abroad. I know a lot of people have travel experiences, and you seem to have a lot of living experiences in multiple countries, which is amazing.
Yeah, I think I thought I was talking to somebody about this the other day, but since high school, which was a few years ago now, unfortunately, I haven't lived in the same place for more than like 3 years, I think, continuously, which is crazy at a time. And I've lived, I guess, in like 4 places since then. So between like
Yeah.
Montreal and New York and Budapest and everything. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot. I think for most people, one move, everyone knows how difficult moving can be within your own country, let alone so many.
Yeah. At some point, I'll have to commit and land somewhere for good. But I think that's probably next on the horizon. Yeah.
Well, there's certainly no rush. Well, awesome. The show is about those stories, those travel stories that had an impact on your life and were just a bit unbelievable in themselves. So, yeah, give me a little context about the story you're about to tell. Where were you? What were you up to? What was going on in your life that made this story so interesting?
Sure. Yeah, we're going to be talking about a trip I recently took to Egypt, where I went. I'm currently living in Budapest in Hungary, and I work for a large international law firm. And I practice, as you mentioned, I do a lot of work on what's called international litigation and arbitration. So it's a lot of cross-border disputes. And it requires me to travel a bit and speak in various languages every day and work in various languages and so on. I'm planning to move to London. And so I agreed with sort of the firm I'm at that I needed to pass the UK bar exam to become qualified as a lawyer in the UK as well.
Right.
I'm currently qualified in the US, in New York. And so, yeah, the point was that preparing for this move, and in order to do so, I had to pass this exam. And as things go, I sort of only was able to register on the very last day of registration for this exam. It's only held twice a year, and there were basically no open spaces anywhere else on the planet other than Cairo. So literally at the last hour before registration closed, like a spot opened up, and I called right in time, and they basically told me the organization that hosts the exam told me that if I wanted to, I could go write it in Cairo. I had never been to Egypt before. So to me, this was certainly going to be an interesting adventure. But as you mentioned, I love to travel. As I've told you before, I I would like to travel to every country before I die. I don't know how feasible that is, but let's we're working towards it. And Egypt, I had been to I've been to the Middle East before and to North Africa and so on, but going to Egypt alone in the dead of July when it's notoriously horribly hot was not something I had experienced yet.
So, just a question there, and probably just to clarify. So, it was the London bar or
Yes,
UK bar, I should
UK
say,
bar.
and you can write it. They've got locations all over the world to write it.
That's correct. Yeah. So normally, you would write it in the city where they host it in a lot of major, not all, but lots of large. So you can write it in Toronto and New York and London, obviously in Paris. I believe a few places in Italy. Even Budapest would have had a few seats. I think they don't all. It's not always the same cities where they host it, but generally you have. I would call it a more sort of standard option than having to travel to Egypt to write
Right.
the bar exam for England and Wales. So yeah, this was definitely very, very unexpected, and I still remember when I told my colleagues at the office that this is basically what we were facing. Everyone had got a real good laugh out of this uh,
Um,
because
Tell me, I guess, tell me the pressure that was on you at the time. You obviously wanted to move, that was your goal to work in London. So, what happens if
absolutely.
you
So
don't pass?
there's definitely a ton riding on this because they only administer the exam twice a year, so you can write it basically at the end of January or at the end of July, and if you don't, there's nothing in between, so you have to wait six. So if I wasn't able to write it at the end of July for whatever reason, I would have had to wait until January, 6 months later, to do it, which would have basically put my whole life on hold for another 6 months. Would have made things really difficult. Also, studying for an exam through December, January is kind of rough for me work wise. It really would have been very, very complicated. I might have had to wait till the following summer, frankly, because of the workload that I would have had at the time, which again would
Okay.
have prevented me from making the move. So, yeah, I was pretty stressed. There was really a lot riding on this. So I think it's a really good question you just asked about sort of what the context was for this exam, because most this is a real big life experience for a lot of people who write the bar exam, right? It's a professional qualification exam, and people get real stressed about it, and so lots of people I think study for months and months ahead of time, and I only had I think 5 weeks to prepare. So really not starting off on the strongest position here, but I was confident I'd be able to do it because I'd already passed the bar exam in New York, and I was really keen on getting this move locked in. So yeah, no one at my office thought there was a chance in hell I'd be able to do this. And when they heard that I was going to Cairo, it was even people were. I think like some of my colleagues were like, "You're just wasting because the firm pays for it." So they're like, "You're just wasting the firm's money here. There's no way this is going to be a successful outing."
So, outside of the professional necessity here, talk to me about your interests. Were you excited to go to Egypt? Were you going to do any traveling on the side? Obviously, you might not have been too focused on this, but a lot of people dream about
Yeah,
going to Cairo, right?
100%. Yeah, it's a very big and popular tourist destination, and rightfully so, with the pyramids and so many other wonderful cultural and historic sites that we're all familiar with. So I really. I was looking forward to going to Cairo because it was a new experience and a new travel opportunity for me. But you have to keep in mind also, I basically told myself that this is obviously not a vacation. I'm going there to write the bar exam. So I flew out. The bar exam was on Thursday, July 20th, and Monday, July 24th, I believe. So it's split over 2 days. And so I flew in on Wednesday, the Wednesday night before the exam, and I left the following Tuesday. So I knew that I wouldn't have a lot of opportunity to basically take a proper sightseeing tour of Egypt and so on, as I would have liked to. But I was determined to at least see the pyramids while I was there, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But I was able to do so at least. But the rest of the time, I was just studying and staying at the hotel, unfortunately. But lots of
Okay.
stories there too.
So that's all right. You had your plan. You obviously were focused on writing the bar and getting the bar done, and then you were going to go see the pyramids.
Yeah, if I could successfully write the exam and see the pyramids, that was going to be a 10 out of 10 experience for me, and based given the parameters that were involved at that time.
Okay. All right. So lead me up to sort of your departure, the prep before flying there. And I guess I mean somewhat knowingly because we everyone's been living through this. It's been quite hot around the world. It was quite hot during the summer. I have a feeling it was pretty hot in July in Egypt. So talk to me about that. I mean, maybe you got lucky.
I certainly did not get lucky. No, as some of your, as all of my friends know, and your listeners perhaps won't at this stage, I do not deal well with heat whatsoever. It is not something I'm good with. As I mentioned, I'm born and raised in Canada. I like the cold. I like the winters, and Egypt. No one in their right mind, I don't think, goes to Egypt in July. Right? It's just not. It's not tourist high season for good reason because it was. I looked it up a few days before I left. I looked up the temperature, and it was basically 50 degrees Celsius during the day. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit. Over 100, though, for sure, I think. Um, and so that was obviously very daunting for me. And it's the kind of heat that if you look at night, it only went down to about 40, which I think is in the 90s. At like midnight, so there's nowhere to hide, and I certainly vividly recall landing in Cairo and just stepping off the plane and just being smacked in the face with like just a tidal wave of heat.
Yeah,
It
I
did not get
think
better after that. Yeah.
50 Celsius is an unreasonably high temperature. That's like 120
Yeah.
Fahrenheit,
Okay. Yeah.
which is, higher than you generally get midsummer in places like Arizona and Texas, although they might have hit that last summer.
Yeah, we got records everywhere, but yeah, that's probably the hottest I've ever experienced personally anywhere.
So you're looking at the weather, you've been preparing for 5 weeks, which as you said was not very much time for the bar, and you're about to take off and you're looking at the weather for the week and you're staring at, mid 40s across the board.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know what I should. I mean, I knew I wasn't going to need any winter clothing, but I just wasn't sure exactly what to pack. And it was basically for the entire period that I was there. Every single day was 50 degrees Celsius, like no clouds, just full sun, consistent heat throughout the entire period. So I had my little carry on, and I think I packed like 10 black t-shirts and like three pairs of shorts.
I'm not sure about the color black in that temperature. I feel like white ones would have been the better
Yeah, actually,
move.
there were some white ones too. But yeah, the others, all I had was basically white and black t-shirts and a pair of pants and some shorts because that was all I was going to need. And it's the kind of heat that you can't like spend time outside during the day in anyway. Like it's so unpleasant, but it's so hot that you can't just be in the sun. At least I've got a British complexion and it does not it's not conducive to direct 50-degree sunlight.
Okay, so it's super hot. You've only had 5 weeks to study. You're flying down, and I guess it's a direct flight, I suppose?
No, I flew from Budapest to Istanbul, and where I had like an hour and a half layover, and then from Istanbul to Cairo. So
Okay.
it was a long day right before the exam, so I was trying not to be too stressed. But yeah, there was nothing enjoyable about the trip over to Cairo from my end, that's for sure.
Okay, well, tell us about arriving in Cairo, going to your
Yeah,
hotel,
yeah, yeah.
maybe anything about your flight down. But yeah,
Yeah, so I actually got a little bit lucky. So my first flight to from Budapest to Istanbul was super uneventful. I just got there, and then I don't know if you've been to the Istanbul airport, but it's just ginormous. It's one of the larger airports I've been to, and but they've got all these crazy U.S. chain. They have like Popeyes chicken and like like every U.S. chain that you can imagine in there, which I thought was kind of interesting because a lot of things that you don't see in Europe, for example. And anyway, so I got on my second flight after waiting, and I was seated next to this Egyptian guy, actually, this lovely guy named Mohammed. And Mohammed worked for some football federation. I can't remember which one now. European football. And
was it
he was born and raised in Cairo. And I ended up chatting with him the entire flight. And he was sort of telling me a bit about his family lives there and what he does and where he likes to eat, and I was trying to get all these tips from him because obviously I had limited time to take advantage of the of Cairo and Egypt altogether, and I wanted to make the best of it in those few opportunities that I would be able to take.
right?
And so yeah, we land in Cairo, and my office had organized the hotel and everything, and so you have to when you land, you as I said, you walk out of the plane and it's those stair things. You don't walk directly into the terminal, at least not on my flight, and I that was 50 degrees right off the plane, and I was absolutely not prepared for it. So I'm already sweating before I step into the terminal. And so there's this whole thing in Egypt. You have to like have precisely 25 US dollars, I believe it is, to like pay for your customs duties or whatever. And you
Okay.
have to bring it in cash, and they can't give you any change back or anything
Yeah.
like that. But luckily, there was a guy from the hotel who like came to get me, which was part of the package, which was super helpful. And then he sort of he asked me for my passport. So I'm standing there in this great big hall with tons of people waiting to get through this customs line. And he just takes my passport and like disappears. And so for a good like 10, 15 minutes, I don't know what he's doing, but I'm standing there without my passport at arrival. But obviously he said he was going to go take care of everything. And he did. So I got a little bit worried after, 15 minutes, but he reappeared kindly and escorted me directly through. So I didn't have to wait in line. And I didn't have any luggage or anything. So we basically went straight through the airport, which was quite easy. And I hopped in a cab, which took me to the hotel downtown. The one thing to remember in Egypt, it's a very tip based culture, so like any small service requires immediate tips.
Then.
Which that's how it is there. That's fine. But I actually took a page out of your book. I remember when one of your trips, you mentioned that you and the guys all you took like a large wad of like $1 US bills with you guys with you. I think.
Yeah, it's pretty typical.
Yeah.
Well, it used to be more typical to do anyway.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I had remembered that, and I think that you can basically pay with U.S. dollars for a lot of stuff in Egypt as well. So I did that too, and luckily was able to navigate my way through a small couple dollar tips here and there throughout my
I
stay.
want to comment. I love the airline, meeting someone on the airline. Those are the best, um, moments or sort of those personal moments where you meet someone on a plane and then you spend the next 2 hours chit chatting with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, this guy Mohammed was absolutely really really kind, and we actually exchanged numbers on the plane, and he was like super
Nice.
insistent that he show me around once I find some time to do so. And
That's
I
lovely.
did end up meeting up with him. I'll get into that in just a minute, but
Oh wow. Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, he I got like a full local cultural experience through Mohammed, which was really really great actually. I think back about that fondly still. But as you say, meeting a local is always the best way to sort of get the lay of the land. I didn't have to do this now because I had my new friend Mohammed, but I started getting haircuts in countries that I travel to. So like the
Okay.
first day I arrive, I'll just go to like a local barbershop and get a haircut. Not all of them are very successful, frankly, but that's not the point, right? You have like some young guy usually who sort of works in a barber shop, and then you ask him, about bars and restaurants and everything, and what he recommends, what's going on in the city that weekend or week, and you always get wonderful, wonderful tips. I did this in Portugal most recently, and it was a really, really good idea. So for all
Nice.
you
That's
listeners
so
out there,
clever.
you don't have to maybe. You don't have to commit to a haircut, but think of something along those lines because that's a really good way to.
Well, you come out looking good. With I guess most of the
It's real
time, you
50-50
got
for
some
me at least, yeah.
information and made a new friend.
Exactly. Exactly. And more
Yeah.
times than not, people are excited to have someone from a faraway country visiting, and they'll offer to show you around and or at least give you some really good tips. And so I was very very fortunate with Mohammed as well in Egypt. So yeah, I guess when you sorry.
Shimmers of hope here. It sounds like you were having a rough trip, but there are some silver linings starting to
Yeah,
appear.
definitely. I mean, again, none of the purpose of the trip was very uplifting in terms of doing fun stuff, but I definitely made the best out of every opportunity I got. So I arrived at the hotel and had dinner, and it's hard to come by alcohol and obviously in the Middle East, in Egypt as well. I
Yeah.
was on a self-imposed no drinking tour for the duration of my studies, so that didn't bother me at all. But yeah, I met there's some Western-looking families who are sort of looking for booze in the hotel lobby with no success. So that's something to keep in mind.
Okay, well, take us towards the main event.
Yeah, so I woke up the next day, and I stayed at this hotel in particular because it was fairly close to the test center, where I was going
Uh-huh.
to write my first day of the bar exam, and so it actually turned out to be a national holiday in Egypt on July 20th. I forget exactly what it was for, unfortunately, but luckily the streets were completely empty because everybody was I got there around 7:30 or 8 in the morning because I think the exam was at 8:30 at the latest, and so again it's 50 degrees already that early in the morning. It's horrifyingly hot, and I get to this I don't want to speak unkindly about it, but a very, very rundown building in a sort of a rundown neighborhood in that sense. And
Uh-huh.
I sort of climbed this stairwell with like exposed wires everywhere, and like I was climbing over garbage bags and everything. And I finally make it into this tiny little office that hosts the UK bar, the bar exam for England and Wales in Egypt. And so it was myself and maybe four or five other people writing it. I think three locals, a US girl, and myself. And about so it's 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon, and about an hour into my first morning, the power cut out in the entire, not just the building, the entire neighborhood apparently. And so, from what I was told, this was a fairly common occurrence, not only in Cairo but in that area in particular. And so, I'm the bigger exams of my life, and I'm sort of panicking, and it's
Right.
the lights go out. Basically, the computer goes off. Like they
Oh
provide you with a
wow.
computer and everything, so like you're sitting in the dark. That's
Are
testing
you are
conditions, so you
you
can't leave.
And just to clarify, sorry, are you taking the exam on a computer or is it written?
No, no, it's on a computer, right? So it's multiple choice. So I'm sitting there in the dark now because there's like no windows in this room, or there's like a tiny little window. There's no the air conditioning goes out, the lights go out, everything stops.
Okay, and this is what, not to take a giant leap here, but I assume this is a timed
Yeah,
exam.
100%. Yeah. So luckily, that was my first question. Was apparently when the computers cut out, when the power cuts out like that, the computer timer sort of stops.
uh,
But they didn't know how long it was going to be, and so on. So this is very problematic because I'm sure you've written some important exams in your life as well, but it's hard to sort of focus so intensely on something and then from 1 minute to the next, you have to stop, and then as soon as the power comes back on, you have to jump right back into it, right? So really, really not a great situation from an exam writing standpoint. But more problematic for me was, as I mentioned, the AC cut out and there was no air,
right.
and it began to be like genuinely it was a sauna in the room. And I looked over at a couple of the local Egyptians who were writing the exam, and they were like profusely sweating, and that's when I knew I was in trouble because if they couldn't handle it, I was not going to survive this. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can
And
only imagine. I mean, we're talking that day it was what, 45 degrees?
it was even hotter inside with no air circulation or anything, right? So it was genuinely a very, very claustrophobic and unpleasant experience. And I remember, yeah, as soon as the power cut out, one of them looked at me and they said, "Yeah, welcome to Cairo." I said, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And so this went on for about a little over an hour, I believe. We were sat in this room with no lights and no air or anything. And then out of nowhere, it all sort of turned back on, and you immediately have to jump, back into the exam as if nothing had happened. So I think I wrote a strongly worded letter to the regulatory authority who administered the exam because no one in London and New York and so on had to go through these power cuts when they were writing it.
Sure.
Uh,
And I guess, do you have water? Are you bringing a water bottle? How does this work?
yeah, I had a water bottle which I wasn't allowed to keep in the room, so I had to like go out and sort of drink every few minutes and then come back in and so on. So it wasn't great, but we got through the day. That was the most important. And
Okay.
again, befriended a couple of the guys that were writing the exam, and there's this little juice place in the building. So they're really big on fresh juices in Egypt.
Yeah.
And so I had never had sugarcane juice before, like freshly pressed, I guess. It was lovely. But their mango game is really strong. I still vividly remember their mango juices. They were genuinely wonderful. So I was a repeat customer there during my time exam
So
writing.
are you done now? Are you drinking juice? Are you done the exam?
Yeah, so I guess that would have been at the end of the day after the afternoon we went through without any actual hiccups rather, and so what really is something important to know that their Egyptian culture I guess requires the locals to really show a level of hospitality that is above and beyond what I've seen, frankly, anywhere else. One of the guys who I was writing the exam with like wouldn't allow me to take a cab back to the hotel. Like, absolutely insisted on driving me himself.
Wow.
I also they wouldn't let me pay for like the juices. Like they were a couple bucks or whatever. Like it was no big deal. And I like they like insist like they. It would have been a personal offense, I think, if I had sort of paid for the juice while they were there,
Okay.
which I thought was like very kind, but like entirely unnecessary, obviously. So Mohammed, actually, with whom I wrote the exam, drove me back to the hotel.
Wow,
And
that's nice.
yeah, really very, especially after a day like that, right? So he's in the same circumstances as I was all day. He was writing, an exam to become a lawyer in the UK, and so he drove me and dropped me off. And I reached out to Mohammed number one from the airplane, and asked him what he was up to, and because I think this would have been Thursday night, and I didn't have another exam until the Monday, so I was planning on sort of working through
Okay,
the
wait. So
weekend.
you had another round of this coming up?
Yeah, yeah, I had a full other day of this coming up on Monday. Yeah, this was not a 1 day experience. I was only
Oh
halfway
boy.
through after the first day, right?
Oh man. Okay.
And you can imagine, like, it's really hard to know with these multiple choice exams how you did. So I wasn't convinced it had gone greatly. In
Well,
particular, with the power cuts in the morning, I thought
yeah.
that really threw me a curveball that I was not
Right.
happy about. But
Sorry. So you messaged Mohammed.
yeah, I messaged Mohammed, and he and his family lived a few minutes away from the hotel I was staying at by total circumstance, and he, like, within like 10 minutes was at the hotel, and was like, "I'm going to show you around," which I'm incredibly kind of him to spare the time to do so. Really, he's a younger guy. I guess he was in his maybe early, late 30s, 40, early 40s at most
Okay.
in that sense. But he already had, like, I think, three kids, and was married, of course. So he was at a different life stage than I am. Like, I'm single and unmarried and no children and
Sure.
so on. But yeah, so Mohammed picked me up and he took me to his favorite restaurant, which was, a lot of Middle Eastern, like, shawarma type foods and all that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
I think I've showed you a few photos, but he basically ordered the entire menu. So they bring out, like, plate after plate after plate of food, and it was genuinely delicious. There's a lot of sort of dips, and grilled meats that you sort of pack onto pitas, with, like, spreads and all that kind of stuff, and
Oh yeah.
really really
That sounds
lovely.
amazing.
But he ordered, frankly enough. I've got a pretty good appetite, but he ordered enough food to feed a small army. I'm not. It's not a joke. There was no, like, we had to, like, shuffle stuff around on the table constantly because there was just no more room. So I kindly suggested that we should probably call it quits after the sixth round of ordering additional stuff for the table. But it was really really. I had a great chat with him. He told me about sort of growing up in Egypt, and he travels a lot for work within Africa and all that kind of stuff. Um, and I was preparing to go see the pyramids the next morning, so that was the extent of my sort of social activity. Was going to be going to see the pyramids on the Friday morning, I guess, because after that I was going to have to study for the second day of the exam. So Muhammad basically, again, like, wouldn't let me pay for the meal, like, but, like, not like there was, not only that, the the waiters spoke English, but when I tried to pay for it, I'm sneaky like this too because I had already been tricked at the juice stand. When he went to the bathroom, I tried to, like, give the guy my credit card, and they all pretended they didn't speak English, like they just didn't understand what I was talking about when I tried to pay for the meal. And turns out Muhammad was equally sneaky. He paid for the meal while he went to the bathroom, right, which was
Gotcha.
but I thought that was quite fun. I mean, again, unnecessarily generous of him, but very much appreciated. And so yeah, we got back in his car afterwards and spent the next hour or so sort of driving around various neighborhoods. He took me to, like, a famous local pastry shop, and then really cool was we stopped by. There's I guess, like, a recreation center of some kind. He called it his social club, but it was like a big outdoor pool where all, like, the kids could go, like, swimming, and all the families would sort of sit around outside on these large terraces, next to sort of soccer fields and tennis courts and so on, and just, like, drink tea out in the evening, and sort of enjoy themselves, and I guess as much as you can in that kind of heat. But he basically took me to this place that I would never ever have seen or found otherwise. Right? It was him and his family, and I was not probably, certainly the only non-Egyptian person within the entire confines of this place. But really lovely. I again had an incredible experience just sitting there, talking to him about his life and his family, and then seeing basically how local Egyptians spend their. I guess that would have been their Thursday night before over a long weekend.
Right.
So it's very, very cool to see that. And again, just so incredibly kind and welcoming, right? There's, like, he wouldn't let me go home. He wanted me to come meet his whole family and sort of, experience the local culture, which I'm very grateful for.
Your day really seemed to end on a high note, which is nice.
Yeah, if you look at where we started with the power cuts and the unwanted sauna during the exam, yeah, it certainly ended on a high note. So I was very lucky with that. And so yeah, after that, I was totally exhausted, and I went back to sleep at the hotel. And I was also very fortunate. My uncle John, who lives in New Mexico, is a big fan of Egypt, and he and his wife go out to Egypt. I think once every year or two, so they go constantly. And
Okay.
they have a local friend who named Hosni who lives in Cairo as well. So I was put in touch with Hosni, who agreed to take me to the pyramids, right, as a local tour guide. And I didn't realize this, but he was actually like an actual official tour guide, or he at least had worked as such for many years.
Right.
And thereby, I proceeded to get one of the most incredible sort of guided tours of a historical site that I could have ever hoped for. Right, it was genuinely wonderful. So I wake up the next morning. Now it's Friday, again 50 degrees, but genuinely like scorching hot. This was a white T-shirt kind of day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Hosty sent a guy to come pick me up at the hotel. Again, sort of super kind and unexpected. And so from where I was, it was a good like 35-minute drive to down to the pyramids. I was in a place called Nasser City, which is sort of a northeastern region of Cairo, and the pyramids, from what I recall, are sort of on the southwest end of the city. And so I got to basically drive across the entire city of Cairo to get there. And yeah, really, I mean, compared to, growing up in North America and Europe, a very, very different world. Like just the architecture, it's very monochromatic. Everything's sort of kind of gray to brownish in color. Like there aren't any vibrant, colors that pop out at you. Obviously, there's significant amounts of poverty, unfortunately, there. And I just remember just a lot of rundown buildings. Sort of the color palette, as I mentioned, being gray is because they just don't paint the buildings. It's just exposed concrete everywhere, and that they don't
Hmm.
finish with like exposed wiring and everything. It looks very unsafe. It seems to work somehow, but yeah, definitely a very very eye-opening sort of look into how the locals live there. Right.
Right.
Um, Driving was also just no, for no amount of money would I accept to sit behind the wheel of a car in Cairo. I had lived in Rome, as you mentioned earlier, and they don't really, believe in lanes and everything, but nothing like Cairo. Like guys are just swerving, like doing like a five lane merge, and like absolutely crazy driving, genuinely crazy. And there's like potholes, the largest potholes you've ever seen on the middle of highways that people are just sort of escaping from one side to the other. So really
Uh-huh.
quite dangerous. I certainly buckled up and I held on for dear life while we were driving down to the pyramids. That was probably the scariest part of my trip. Yeah, the driving part.
The driving. Okay.
Exactly. But yeah, so we got down to the pyramids, and I think I got pro tip: get there as soon as they open, because it's just a disaster with the tourists, even during high season or low season. I guess it would have been in the heat. But I'd heard very mixed reviews about Cairo before going. A lot of people have had sort of negative experiences, unfortunately, because as a solo traveler, it's difficult, or especially I think women have a difficult time if they're traveling there.
Hmm.
But I got super lucky again with Husney, who basically got picked me up from the car, and then he just walked wherever he wanted to go. So like there were no fences that were closed, there's no doors that were locked. It was truly incredible. So I got sort of like a backstage tour of the pyramids. We went in. I will say I was thoroughly impressed. Like there's an aura about the pyramids, when at least for me when I was standing next to them, that was really really impressive. There are a lot, the main pyramid of Giza is huge. Frankly, I think it's somewhere around 200 meters tall.
Hmm.
And when you're standing next to it, there's just these huge blocks of sort of they're not brick, they're limestone, I believe, and they're just the actual I don't how they managed to sort of build these structures 5,000 years ago is truly remarkable. With
Yeah.
each block had to be carried up individually on barks from the Nile and so on. So truly fascinating. But yeah, we went around and went into two of the pyramids, and then there's some temples nearby, and I got to go to like into an underground burial chamber that like no one else was in, and all these kinds of things. So yeah, I would strongly, and also it's important to learn about the history of the pyramids while you're there. So I would strongly recommend anybody who does go to get a local tour guide, because it makes a huge difference.
Good to
Um,
know.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, how does that, how does it stack up against some of the other areas you've been I know that feeling when you see something for the first time and that aura that you're talking about, the magnitude sort of hard to
Yeah.
comprehend.
Like in Rome, for example, the Colosseum I thought was like kind of underwhelming because it was a lot smaller than it looked like, sort of in movies and all that
Right.
kind of stuff. Still, really, really an incredible building, but yeah, no, for me, the pyramids were really a big, big highlight, and I had always, I didn't want to forego the opportunity to see them, and I strongly recommend everyone once in their lives see the pyramids because it's absolutely worth it. Um,
Awesome.
yeah, I think Jerusalem was one of those places that I went to as well, where I sort of there's something the historical importance of it strikes you when you're walking around, and I got a similar feeling at the pyramids. But I wouldn't
Mm.
say I've really gotten that at monuments. The Eiffel Tower has got nothing on the pyramids, right?
So you're out at the pyramids. Did you get to do anything else that day? I guess you probably had in the back of your mind studying still. So how you feeling?
Getting pretty stressed. We had a late start to the day. I wanted to be back at the hotel for by noon, and I don't think I got back until about 2. And I had a fairly regimented study schedule waiting for me, so I was a bit stressed about that. But no, right after we saw the pyramids, the Sphinx. We went, there's a bunch of vantage points where you can take photos, with the pyramids in the background and all that kind of stuff. So we did that. I opted not to take the camel tour. I thought that was unnecessary in the,
Okay.
the 1,000-degree heat. And I remember I took this 2-liter water bottle with me, and I drank it all within about 30 minutes of arriving because it was so hot and I was so parched. But the water within it was genuinely, it was like hot, it was shower temperature. It was so hot. It was gross.
Uh,
Yeah, just to give
yeah.
everybody a feeling for what the kind of heat was actually happening there.
Important to
Um,
stay hydrated.
yeah, very much so, especially in those conditions. So yeah, we did that, and then yeah, Hostin took me to a local, food stand, which was quite tasty. And then they have this place where they make you can buy drawings in like hieroglyphics on papyrus, and they show you how it's made and all that kind of stuff. So that was I bought some tourist trinkets there and so on, and then headed back to the hotel.
Okay.
And but again, because of the heat, I think I got back to the hotel and then I slept for like 3 hours immediately. I just couldn't, like, it drained me completely. Like I hadn't felt that exhausted in a very long time. So yeah, that was the pyramids. Strongly recommend to everybody. And then I don't think I
I mean,
left. Sorry,
no, no, go ahead.
I don't think I left the hotel after that, unfortunately. So I wish I could say I was much better tourist than I had been, because obviously when I'm in a new country, I try to make the best of it. But yeah, that first that morning was the extent of my. I didn't get to go to the Egyptian museum, for example. It has all of the actual artifacts that they found in the pyramids and so on. So that'll be for another trip. But yeah, there's a lot. I think you need at least 2-3 days in Cairo to see everything that you want to see there.
I was gonna say you're doing quite well here between your evening with Muhammad and your guided tour of the pyramids, and some of like for a trip where you're focused on the
Yeah.
exam like this is pretty good.
I honestly, I got a lot more out of it than I thought I would. I think most people who were more responsible than I am probably just wouldn't have left the hotel and would have studied nonstop for the second day.
Sometimes
But
you gotta take those risks,
yeah,
right?
I wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I went to Egypt and to Cairo specifically and didn't see the pyramids. You know what I mean? Like that, I don't think that would not have been an acceptable outcome for me. So I rolled the dice and made the best of it. And then yeah, so I just studied for the rest of the weekend, and then Monday morning back to the rundown test center,
Uh-huh.
where when I arrived, the entire neighborhood was out of power again. So I had to sit, and at least I wasn't locked in the room this time. But like I think we waited about an hour and a half this time for the power to come on. And again, you're right. You're stressed out. You're trying to get through the second day of the exams, and you're sitting in a non-air conditioned building, waiting for the power to come on. Because as soon as it comes on, you have to rush into the room and sort of start writing the exam, right? So two for two on the power cuts. Yeah.
But by that point, you're a bit more seasoned. You know the lay of the land.
Yeah, and I knew the fruit juice place was downstairs, so I could run down and
Right.
pick something up too. But yeah, no, I got through that, and it was another rough day of exam taking, and the relief I felt afterwards was incredible. Yeah, getting through an ordeal like that really makes you appreciate not having to worry about that anymore, right? So we all went for a victory mango juice with everyone else that was writing the exam afterwards.
Nice.
And yeah, Mohammed number two drove me back to the hotel very kindly again. And actually, so my hotel was right next to a really modern sort of mall. It was like a seven-story mall. It was I forget what it was called, City Stars, I think it's called. It had like every food court imaginable, like every store you can think of. And so I decided to go there to walk around and check it out the night after my second day of exams. And yeah, just a lot of local Egyptians eating cinnabon, having a good time. But I certainly, one thing I will say is I was walking around there by myself. So I had a very different experience when I was with a local Egyptian than when I was alone. And I think that harkens back to what we were discussing earlier about people having sort of mixed experiences in Egypt. But I was just getting like suspicious looks from everyone while I was walking around this mall. Like, who is this guy? What is he doing? This is not a tourist place. What's happening? Whereas anytime I was with, Hosni or Mohammed or anything, people were unbelievably welcoming and friendly and kind. So I think, yeah, they look at you with suspicion, at least in my case, if you're by yourself. But if you have someone to vouch for you, you're among some of the kindest, most welcoming people. So definitely a bit of a contrast that I wasn't expecting, but yeah, that's how it went.
Okay, so and I presume this was the end of your trip.
Yeah,
You found a flight home.
flew back. So I was in Cairo, I think, on the Monday. I flew back to Budapest on the Tuesday, and then I had a wedding in Toronto, I think, the next day, right? You and I attended together. I think that was actually a Friday, but I basically was on three continents in 3 days, so that was a lot.
Okay, well, I think if I may summarize a little bit, despite a pretty rough situation, not having much time to study for a huge exam, a test that had a lot of impact on your life, it seems like there was a lot of good that came out of this trip.
Certainly a lot more than I would have expected. Absolutely. I don't think I could have planned or gotten anything more out of this trip than given, the circumstances of the exam than I did. So I was very, very fortunate and grateful that I was able to get a real look into sort of local life and see the pyramids. And, good news, I ended up passing the exam, which was
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say $1 million question.
million
What
dollar
happened?
question. Sorry for dropping that early, but yeah, I coming out of Cairo at the end, it was I was not comfortable saying that I had passed the exam. Like I was not sure at all. Um,
You're hedging your bets with your colleagues and stuff.
yeah, I told them all about obviously the power cuts and everything. It's like, so if I don't pass, it's because of these horrible circumstances. But no, luckily I did enough to pass the exam. So I found out about that a few weeks later, and yeah, qualified to practice law in England and Wales now.
Well,
Thank
congratulations.
you.
It's nice to
Um,
hear that after all that, you can
yeah,
move
I
on
so
with that step in your life
again, I think to
and, enjoy some wonderful memories.
yeah, I've got some great pictures of myself in front of the pyramids, and I took a photo of the dinner table that Muhammad covered in every dish known to Egyptian cuisine. And yeah, no, I've got some really good memories of it. At some point, I'll have to go back because there's lots I haven't seen there that needs to be seen. But really recommend. Again, I was hesitant before going because about what my experience would be because I had heard so many mixed reviews. But I really do recommend it. I think it's absolutely worthwhile seeing, and certainly if you can find a local tour guide or something, that'll make a huge difference for your experience. There's no doubt about it.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Awesome. Well, Mark, thanks so much for sharing. I mean, I love these stories, kind of on a whim. You had to go to Egypt, really made the most of it. Luckily, pulled off a win for your test or on your test. But, I think it's a great example of why travel is so special sometimes.
Yeah, this certainly gets you out of your comfort zone, and at least for me, this was a very far out of my comfort zone, and worthwhile because it's good to see how other cultures live and pass the time.
Definitely. Definitely. Thanks again for sharing.
My pleasure, Andrew. My pleasure. Take care.
Well, a big thank you to Mark for joining us and sharing his story. It sounds like he's got another big move coming up. To everyone listening, thank you as always for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you happen to have an amazing travel story that you'd like to tell, please find me at oneofftravelstories.com.